Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. It's the end of the year, and it's time for us to look back, and we did that for you. Here's the best of Judging Freedom in the past 12 months. Merry Christmas to you. Does that pass the smell test to you with all your experience in state and federal courtrooms?
I hate to give you a lawyer's answer, but the answer is it may. And it
I want a lawyer's answer. That's why you're here, young lady.
What I certainly heard yesterday from Preet Bharara, who was the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York during President Obama's time, who knows the prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, very, very well. Alvin Bragg worked for Preet Bharara. Preet Bharara actually endorsed Alvin Bragg in his run. And he claims that Alvin Bragg is very methodical and that Alvin Bragg would have had all of the research done and that he would not be taking a case of this magnitude, meaning the magnitude of being the first case in the United States against a former president of the United States, unless Alvin Bragg really believed that this was a prosecution that would withstand a legal look from a judge on a motion to dismiss. Now, I have heard that other people who have been in that office or who have looked at that office, meaning the DA's office, who have said that there have been times where a falsification of business records, which, as you say, is a misdemeanor, which indeed it is, and it can only be raised to the level of a felony, albeit a Class E felony, but that it can be raised to the level of a felony if you can say that the falsification of these business records was done either to commit or to conceal another crime, right, and that crime might be federal. Now, I do not know of any case, and I have looked, that approaches this particular allegation, where you're looking at a federal election violation or a federal campaign violation, where those violations most often are not prosecuted criminally. Yes, indeed, Michael Cohen was prosecuted criminally.
And went to jail.
But let's keep this in mind as well. Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to a very long indictment that had many counts, some of which at the end of the indictment, it's an information, that's information with a capital I, which is analogous to an indictment, except it hasn't gone through a grand jury process.
Right.
It's a charging document. Now, when Michael Cohen pleaded guilty, the campaign violations are the last violations in the indictment. The indictment is really looking at other acts of fraud that Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to, which had to do with his taxi medallion business and other things that he had done where he had lied. So it's not just simply that he pleaded guilty to this campaign violation. Now, Donald Trump was not indicted. At the time that Michael Cohen had the information filed against him, Donald Trump is mentioned in the information as individual number one, who is the person who is running for president of the United States. During that time, of course, the Justice Department was being run by William Barr, and that was during the presidency of Donald Trump. And the federal policy, the federal rule was you will not indict a sitting president. However, as of the beginning of 2021, we had a new president in office, and therefore we have a new attorney general. So Merrick Garland obviously made a choice for the last 2 years and 2 months not to prosecute this crime. Whether he made a choice by considering it or not, or whether he thought he had bigger fish to fry because he really was looking into what happened on January 6th, and now with the special counsel continues the look at January 6th, which could really lead to serious charges, all the way up to seditious conspiracy or not. And he has the special counsel, Jack Smith, also looking into obstruction of justice and the retention of documents that were classified at Mar-a-Lago. I think by anyone's estimation, those cases are far more serious than this one in terms of the fact alone that they are crimes against the United States of America. While saying that, it does not mean that this case is not serious. And it certainly does not mean that this case will not go forward with all of the backing of the people in the district attorney's office in New York County, which is Manhattan.
Ed Rollins, of course, a former colleague of mine at Fox News, but long before Fox existed, Ed and I were colleagues in political wars going back to Ronald Reagan's race against President Jimmy Carter in 1980, and later some very important for me, for Ed, and for the public races here in the state of New Jersey. My dear friend, what a pleasure to see your face again. Welcome.
My pleasure.
Podcast.
My pleasure, Judge. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. So what I want to talk to you about today is the state. I realize we're a little early on this, but the state of the what you expect will be the Republican race for the Republican nomination for president in 2024. What is your general feel about the attitude of mainstream Republicans and whether Donald Trump will bring victory to the party for the White House in 2024? Is he their best candidate?
I don't underestimate his ability to get the nomination, although I'm supporting DeSantis. But at the same time, winning a nomination is totally different than winning a presidency. In order to win the presidency, a plurality of voters in America today are independents. They're not Republicans, they're not Democrats. So you can get 95% of the Republicans and not do well with the independents or the Democrats and lose. So my fear is that when you go through the next 2 years of chaos, Trump could easily win the nomination. I think he'll be contested, and I think he may have more trouble than he thinks, for the simple reason it's awful hard. You know, you've been around the courtroom a long time. I've been around a lot of campaigns. When the leader is distracted, and certainly Donald Trump's going to be distracted like he's never been distracted before, you can't have multiple court hearings and lawyers saying, you got to sit down and give me your evidence, your testimony. You got to basically pay attention to this and be running a viable campaign. So I think there's chaos. I think that where we are as a country is that Democrats would much rather have someone other than Joe Biden to run, even though they're comfortable with him now. They're just not comfortable with him in the future. I think Republicans, a lot of money Republicans particularly, think, okay, we've had our term with Trump. We're not dissatisfied with his policies, but the personality conflicts and all the rest of the chaos that went on in the White House and the chaos that's now going on in his legal life, let's try someone that's more viable.
If Trump is the nominee of the Republican Party and Joe Biden is the nominee of the Democratic Party, given all your experience and your extraordinary understanding of these things, is that good for Joe or bad for Joe?
I would think Trump is the weakest candidate to go against. Biden has beat him once already. He certainly has all the resources of a presidency to add to that mix. And I think to a certain extent, Trump's not going to be as strong. Trump talks about his 77 million votes that he got the last time. He'd be hard pressed to get that same vote again. And I think it may be the numbers may be the same because usually about 10 to 15 million new voters turn out. But he's certainly not going to attract the independents. I don't think he's going to bring back suburban women that we lost badly in the last two elections. So my sense is I'm not optimistic about a Trump winning a presidency again.
Is this issue of Ukraine a dividing line for Republicans? Now, I know you have watched my podcast. I am decidedly on the same side as Ron DeSantis on this. I believe that we are wasting human life and money by being involved in a fight in which we have no dog in the fight. Joe Biden is staking his career on this. I think he wants to run for re-election like his hero FDR as a wartime president. What is your take on what happened? Was it a coup? Was the CIA involved? Why did Prigozhin turn around? Was it just an effort to isolate the Russian defense minister? What do you think was behind all this, Scott?
Well, let's just start with definitions. The first thing we have to acknowledge is it was an armed insurrection. By definition, Wagner, under arms, revolted against government rule. Now, Prigozhin will say, I did it because I'm anti-Shoigu, anti-Gerasimov. I mean, just imagine if an American mercenary group, let's say Blackwater, decided, what the heck, we're going to get inside our U.S. government-funded helicopters and vehicles, and we're going to drive to Washington, D.C. To kick out Lloyd Austin and General Miley. We're not going to touch Joe Biden, just Austin and Miley. Would people call that a coup? Of course it's a coup, because by saying that you want to get rid of Lloyd Austin and General Miley, you're saying that Joe Biden has no authority, that you are a higher authority than the elected president. Let's just stop the nonsense of pretending this wasn't a coup. It was a coup. It was designed to topple the government of Vladimir Putin. Now, the question is why? Well, we have some insight now. We know that Prigozhin, again, he's a businessman. He's not a military leader. People need to understand that. Wagner is a private military company. It's not an army. It has no sovereign status. It exists because the Russian government funded it to the tune of $940 million in an annual contract that was signed on 1 May 2022, due to expire 1 May 2023. And because Prigozhin had difficulties with Shoigu, and because of the legal aspects of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic becoming Russia, meaning that private military contract can't exist, the contract wasn't going to be extended. Wagner, if it was going to continue to exist, had to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense and become a volunteer unit under the auspices of the Ministry of Defense. This means that Shoigu would lose all that money. He didn't want to lose that money. He didn't want that contract. This was always about money. This was about greed. Prigozhin's greed.
So let me just make sure, because we have an international audience here, that I have this straight. The government of Ukraine, President Zelensky's government, is using American weaponry and American ammunition to kill people it considers to be Ukrainians, Ukrainian civilians in areas it considers to be Ukraine. Is that a fair statement of what's happening?
Unfortunately, yes. And this is a form of ethnic cleansing, you could say, because the population that lives in these areas are mostly ethnic Russians. And the Ukrainian government is viewing the Russian people that consider themselves Russian. They don't consider themselves Ukrainian anymore, because when Yanukovych was ousted in 2014, they viewed their Ukraine as dead. This is what the locals say. They view themselves as Russian here and want to be part of Russia, and wanted to be part of Russia for the last 9 years, almost a decade.
So what would the Air Force, never mind a 21-year-old Air National Guardsman who probably only works on weekends, what would the Air Force be doing with an internal CIA document that was never put on a server?
Ostensibly, it's to to keep the senior management, senior leadership informed. Understand that this particular unit that Teixeira was a part of, the Air National Guard, is part of the 16th Air Force. Their job is information warfare. In other words, and they're specifically connected to the ISR. I hate to dump the acronyms. That stands for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So all ISR activities of the U.S. government are funneled into them. And so you've got a lot of overhead surveillance, drones, and fixed-wing aircraft, such as the Rivet Joint, RC-135, and that information is brought down, and then they figure out how to send some stories. So I think it's really, at a minimum, it's ironic, and at a more diabolic level, it's highly, highly suspicious that these leaks come out of the information warfare component of the Air Force.
Does an Air National Guardsman work 5 or 6, 7 days a week, like full-time
Right.
Air Force or full-time Army?
If the Air National Guard was activated, and we've had National Guard units that were activated and sent to combat theaters like Afghanistan or Iraq, that would be one thing. But that's not the case with this current unit that Takara is a part of. So they're what they, you go back to the old weekend warrior, and that's not to denigrate them, but what they do is they get together once a month. Well, what I still don't know is what weekend of March and February, March, April did that unit meet? Because and when you come together, it's not just Jack showing up on his own and they sign him to a cubicle and he's there unmonitored and just doing whatever he wants. He's involved with hierarchical system that has non-commissioned officers, sergeants, and lieutenants, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels. Everybody is there to make sure that their training objectives met, and they assign tasks and they monitor what's going on. And so to get access to those documents, he would have had to be in a skiff, and he'd absolutely not be left on his own just to do whatever he wanted to surf, if you will, surf the web.
All right. What is the big picture significance to what you're saying? That someone north of him, I guess nobody's south of him. He's the bottom of the totem
Right.
pole. Someone, don't let me put words in your mouth, Larry, significantly north of him wanted this information out there.
Yeah, I don't think it's just necessarily someone. It may be a group of people that he became a convenient tool, someone they could manipulate, use to get a message out. Because what has transpired, they already saw in February that within the intelligence community that the policy in Ukraine is going south, that it's going to collapse. The United States does not have the industrial capability to sustain the Ukrainian army in the field. We can't provide enough artillery shells, artillery pieces, or aircraft. So that's number one. Then add to that what happened in March, and I think this was sort of the final impetus that provided for these leaks. The summit between Putin and Xi Jinping of China has dramatically and historically changed world affairs. It's important that the people listening to us now understand that this is transformative. We've not seen anything like this since the end of World War II. What it has done, it has upset the world order. Prior to March, prior to that summit, the United States, for example, was backing and supplying wars in Yemen and Syria. The purpose of both wars was to target Iran, and as an effort to try to weaken Iran. Since that summit, China has created a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is now working with Iran to stop the war in Yemen. They're working to stop the war in Syria by bringing Bashar Assad back into the Arab League. Well, if you're a CIA officer who's been sitting there directing these wars, you're all of a sudden got to be horrified. This is falling apart, completely falling apart. And then on top of it, the role of the US dollar is degrading as a reserve currency. And many, not just one country, but multiple countries are basically telling the United States, we don't need you, we're going to go do our own thing. So in the midst of this, that's why I think there is a panic within some of the foreign policy circles on the national security side, in intelligence agencies and in the military, that we are now setting ourselves up for some major defeats. And part of the reason to leak this information is to get it out there, both to discredit, to show what Biden is really doing, to make sure people focus on that and prepare people for what I've called a soft landing. It's going to be more like a hard landing when the reality intrudes that we've been unable to stop Russia in Ukraine, and Russia has completely overmatched us in both production of weapon systems and electronic warfare.
So let's say that the federal government has bills of $4.5 trillion because Congress has authorized the expenditure of that kind of money. Can they borrow $5.5 trillion just to have $1 trillion in the kitty for a rainy day?
It looks like theoretically they could. Now, of course, the more they borrow, the more upward pressure that puts on interest rates. And they're afraid of pushing interest rates any higher. That's going to make banks go bankrupt even faster. And it would mean the Fed would have to purchase more and more government debt just to push those interest rates back down. So that's a limit in the sense of they're worried about that. But sure, they could borrow endlessly so long as you have some mechanism where people are going to continue to buy up those treasuries that they put out there. Now, there may not be available buyers at anything under 6%, say, if you just keep just piling debt on top of debt. So we'll see just what happens here, how much bigger these debts can get, how much bigger the deficits each year.
I guess no one in the Congress, other than maybe the 40, 50, or 60 Republican so-called renegades, is really worried about the long-term consequences of debt, its effect on interest rates, its effect on where tax dollars go. I mean, at the rate we are going, is it not inconceivable with interest rates going up, with government borrowing going wild, in 10 or 15 years, the federal government will be spending $1 trillion a year in debt service, in interest rates only, without reducing principal?
Yeah, I think that's what's fooled so many people into thinking that just borrowing $1 trillion has no real downside, because it seemed like free money for a long time, because we were looking at average interest rates on government debt at 1.5%. It was just rock bottom, low sorts of stuff. So just imagine if you could just borrow money endlessly at 1%, right? Hey, why not just keep doing it? And if interest rates are never going to go up, you'll probably be fine. But the problem is now you just double that to 3% or 4%, which isn't even a high interest rate. Now suddenly you're doubling or increasing by 150% the amount that you have to pay in debt service, just what you're paying in interest. And that was, say, 350 billion. Well, next thing you know, it's 700 billion and then 900 billion. And this is all just in the next 5-6 years. So then you're looking at $1 trillion just to pay off your creditors. Well, where does that money come from? Well, you're going to have to take money from defense, from Social Security, from Medicare in order to pay those creditors. And that's going to be a real political problem for these people. But I guess Ryan will be out of power by then.
Ryan, does the government do the unthinkable? Well, the short answer to that is yes, but I got to finish the question. Does the government borrow money in order to pay interest on money it's already borrowed?
Well, they're essentially doing that now, right? Where it all just goes into one big pot, right? So the contrary to myth, right? It's not like your Social Security tax has to go to Social Security or something like that. It just goes into the pot and then it goes out the door to wherever it's deemed to be needed. So sure, any of that new debt, portions of it are being used to pay off the old debt. And so that's just the hamster wheel we're on. It's, well, take out new debt to pay off old debt. And that's the definition in some cases of a zombie company, a zombie bank.
Correct.
Right? You just take on new debt to pay off old debt. Now that works so long as interest rates are going down, as they have been for the last 30 years, essentially. But once they start going back up, then you start to get big problems, as we're seeing now.
Here's an exhausted, necktie loosened, hair messed, confronting defeat Chip Roy. Chip is the congressman from Texas who, cheering him on, led the renegade Republicans and may lead them again when they challenge Kevin McCarthy's speakership, another issue for another time. But here he is at the tail end of a meeting of the House Rules Committee on which he sits when he knew that his efforts to stop this would be fruitless.
This doesn't represent any material change in the direction of where this country is going in terms of spending. The massive increase of debt was sort of a blip on the radar. But even the Limit, Save, Grow Act is just nibbling around the edges of what needs to be done. I don't understand how my colleagues can go to the steps of the Capitol and have all these groups from their middle school and elementary school and high school and talk to them about all the future of this country and where we're headed, when each and every one of them has a $100,000 debt payment attached to them.
Each and every one of those kids has a $100,000 debt attached to them.